and get started with today's presentation. So, how to prioritize accessibility. This is a word that you might hear thrown around here and there, especially if you ever do any work on websites, or if you're an educator, or if you've ever had some reason to need help understanding or getting to or seeing or hearing information. So I like to start with a definition, and this is straight out of a dictionary, the Cambridge Academic Dictionary. Accessibility is the quality or characteristic of something that makes it possible to approach, enter, or use it. So we can think about this in terms of a building. Are people able to find signage to let them know what building they're going into? Are they able to go in the building? Are the doors functional? Are they able to use the building once they're inside? You can also think of it in terms of information. Of course, as a librarian, we're always thinking about how our users are going to use our services, whether that be books or databases or our computers or the knowledge of the librarians. We want to make sure people are able to get to that information, get to those information sources, and use them appropriately. So, and of course, they have an example here. Touchscreen voting machines meet the requirements for accessibility to people with disabilities. So, there are a few different aspects of accessibility that we're going to talk about today. Now, this is not an all-encompassing deep dive into accessibility. This is pretty close to the surface, but we want to make you aware of things that are going on that you may not think of if you don't need that help. So for visual media, I'm doing a PowerPoint presentation. You might be presenting a poster. You might be creating a print invitation or flyer for something. One of the things to think about is your font choice and the size of your fonts. Now, this font here we have a piece of parchment paper with a really fancy calligraphy font printed on it. And I suspect this is not in English anyway, but it's really challenging to read because of all of the swirls and flourishes on the letters. And also because maybe I was never taught to read printing in that manner. So that wouldn't necessarily be a particularly accessible font. Over on the other side, we have a neon sign with a script font that if the picture was moved over, I suspect would say thank you. And that's in red lettering. So that's a little easier to read. That's something you might encounter if you're out at a mall or walking through businesses or things like that around the city. You might see neon signs with a script type font that say things as you're driving around. So that's a little bit better. In the bottom corner, we have what looks like a decoration in a house or a business. And it's created with block letters that are different sizes. They're all capital letters, but they are of different sizes, and the letters themselves are made of different patterns. So we have polka dots and stripes, kind of a burlap looking color, a plaid. The font itself would be fairly legible. It's a simple sans serif font. The capital letters make it very clear what letters those are, but because of the size and texture differences, it can take a little bit of time for your brain to process that. And then, of course, on the last photo, I have the word hotel written in all capital letters in a black font on a white background. Very legible, very easy to read, very, very easy to understand what's being said there. So those different styles of fonts, different sizes of fonts. Make sure that as you're putting these on your print media or your digital media, that you're choosing a font that will be legible for the people that you are presenting the information to, at a good size where people can read it, right? Something else to take into consideration there is your color contrast. We run across this a lot with the website because our UT Tyler orange, as much as I love it, it's really hard to get the right contrast with that color. It does better as the font color on a white background, but trying to do the green orange background with a white font on it, it doesn't really meet the contrast standards for accessibility. So when you're thinking about your choices that you're making on colors, make sure that the color contrast is good, that the colors can be seen. If you're going to have one color font on a different color background, make sure that people can still read those. And it's not just, can I read it? But you may think about people who might have low vision or people who might experience color blindness, and different things like that, where it might make it a little different for them to see than how you see. So of course, ask other people, but also use color contrast checkers. You can find those online to make sure that your fonts are going, or your colors are going the right way. And finally, when we're talking about presentations like the one I'm doing, think about your transitions. I'm just doing a simple click to the next slide, and it kind of slowly fades off and back in. There's nothing abrupt or jarring. You really want to try to keep those transitions smooth. There may be folks in your audience who that's very distracting for, or it could trigger a migraine, or there could even be people with seizure disorders. And some of these transitions where it looks really cool to you because it's like curtains opening and closing, or the letters are flipping around and tumbling onto the screen. You know, that might be fun if it's like a party invitation or something that you're just sharing with friends. But when you're thinking about a broader audience that you want to share with, try to keep it nice and smooth. So when you're doing oral communication, there is another set of considerations that you might have. One that I always find to be a big pet peeve is when people don't want to use the microphone. Use the mic. I have a loud, booming voice. I can raise my voice quite loudly. That's still not fair to people who might not be able to understand me because of background noise. As we've experienced after COVID, of course, the Zoom this, Zoom that, obviously we're sharing on Zoom right now. There are a lot of times where you might be sitting in a room for a meeting, and maybe there's one room meeting with another room and one, but they're only each one on a Zoom. Or you might be sitting in your office or at home joining in on a class or a meeting that is in a bigger room where there's one Zoom up for 20, 40, 60 people. And somebody invariably will get up in that room and say, oh, I don't need the mic. I can talk really loudly. And that's great for everybody that's sitting in the room. They can probably hear. I'm on Zoom. Doesn't help me at all. So don't feel embarrassed about taking the microphone. Don't think that you can speak loudly and clearly enough not to need it. Use the microphone. That's what they're there for. Another thing to think about is choosing your words. And I should have added your pace of your words also. I am a pretty excitable person, and I generally talk pretty fast. So I know I have to slow myself down when I want to make sure that everybody is understanding what I'm saying, but also choosing words that you can expect your audience to understand. If you're presenting to class, obviously everybody that's been in your class this whole semester should have a grasp of the same vocabulary about your topic that you do. But maybe it's a special project where everybody got to pick their own topic. And so the rest of your class may not have the same understanding that you do. Make sure you're choosing words that you can expect people to understand, and choose words that you can expect them to catch up on, if not, that you're willing to define, excuse me. Choosing your words can also mean choosing words that don't carry bias with them. You don't want to, I'm going to back up a moment. I share this example because it was one of the most mortifying things that I ever did when I first became a librarian. I was all excited about doing a presentation to a class. I had this great activity that I had read about, and I thought, oh, I want to do that. And it was stand up if you have brown hair. And I'm looking around the class and, people are standing up, except for one student who was in a wheelchair. Obviously couldn't participate in that. So make sure you're selecting something different or choosing the right words to use in that situation so that you don't have that horrible sinking feeling that you've excluded somebody the way that I did. And of course, consider your surroundings. If you are going to be in a large room and the lights are going to be turned off during your presentation, I highly recommend not using a plain white background. That's going to be like this blinding, staring into the sun thing at the front of the room for everybody else who's sitting out in the audience. If you are going to have a big room, also going back to using the mic, but consider that when you're doing your presentation. Maybe you have a small video clip that you want to include. Make sure that it's going to be able to be heard through the computer or through the speakers while you're doing that. Don't ask people to get up and move around if your room is going to be crowded, like the one that's shown in this picture. That wouldn't be really conducive to whatever activity it is that you want to do. So make sure you're aware of what the room or the surroundings will be like when you're doing a presentation and kind of adjust accordingly. Do I have any questions so far?
I was just going to tag on. I have terrible eyesight, and so I always sit at the front of the room to give myself, the advantage. But in considering your space, taking into account how much you're putting on a slide, and knowing that if you do choose, even if you have a really dark background, white lettering does not translate to the back of the room very well. And so if you have a ton of stuff on your slide and it's in white, I'm not going to be able to see it. And if I didn't get there early, which I'm notorious for not doing, then I don't have a front of the room seat either. So that's something that I've had conversations with professors about, hey, either save me a seat up front or change your font color, because I'm not getting anything on your slides.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That's definitely true. And something that I include when I'm doing a presentation about doing presentations, but I didn't think about it today. And it's a great point. Make sure that your slides are clean, right? This is going to come up a little bit in this next part, but it's not just the font color or the font size that can affect how people see things. It's how much is on that slide too. So thank you so much for adding that. I appreciate it. So we're going to talk a little bit about our digital content. And when we're talking about this, I'm largely talking about websites, but it can also be emails or, maybe you're printing up a QR code to send somebody to something that you created. Make sure in the background you're using clean code. If you ever use HTML, CSS, JavaScript, you know that there are some tags that you can use to make sure that a screen reader will be able to provide somebody with low vision the best possible version of your website that is going to not have jumping around the page. I've helped students before who use a screen reader, and I never understood. I knew that it had to be, a challenge, but I never understood exactly how distracting it could be to have a website that doesn't have clean code in the background, and the screen reader's trying to catch up. And of course, it's reading everything to you based on what that background code is. So there can be a lot of extraneous noise if you're not careful. Also, think about your usability. So this goes to what we were talking about earlier a little bit, the visuals of what is on the screen, and this goes back to the code too. You don't want to have so much information on a page that people get overloaded. And it's funny because there are studies that show people prefer the aesthetics of the way things look in one direction, but they actually understand the information better in another direction. So for instance, with websites, a lot of times, if you show people a website with 3 or 4 columns, they think, oh yeah, that looks nice, I want to use that. Versus if you show them a website with like one narrow left-hand column and then a lot of open space on the right, they think, no, that doesn't look as good. But when you test how they use those screens or those websites, they are quicker and more successful at finding information on the 2-column website. So a lot of times, if you were to show a friend or some classmates something and say, hey, which one of these looks better, they might choose example A and say, oh, that looks pretty. Yeah, it's really well laid out. But you want it to be useful. You want people to find what they're looking for. So layout B might be the better choice. Taking that back to what we were talking about with like slides and posters, when you're doing a slideshow, you don't want to have whole pages of just paragraph after paragraph after paragraph. For one thing, people aren't going to listen to you. They're going to be too busy trying to jot down all of your paragraphs. But also, if they were looking for information, it would be really hard to pick out the 1 or 2 important things that are in there because it's surrounded by all of this other extra stuff. You notice I'm a big fan of using bullet points. It makes it easy for people to see what you're talking about. And maybe having a slight bit of color contrast, just like you would with headings in a paper or on a poster, that you would put things in bold to make those stand out. You can organize information that way and it makes it more usable. Finally, this isn't so much a tip or a thing to do as a tip for where to go. The World Wide Web Consortium has their web accessibility initiative, and that's a great place to go if you are interested in getting a little more in depth about those coding things or about the accessibility of your digital media. They have wonderful examples. They have color contrast checkers. They have code checkers where you can check a website. It's called Wave, and it will wave your website and tell you, hey, you've actually done this, where you have photos that don't have an alt text in them, or you have a table used to make things laid out so it looks pretty, but if a screen reader is trying to read that, it's just jumbled. It's not really effective. So definitely recommend for any digital media that you're going to put out that you visit with them, visit their website and go through those checkpoints to at least clean things up as much as possible. And that is it. I know, like I said, this is intended to be kind of a quick overview of things that you may or may not think about personally. We do have great resources here on campus in our Student Accessibility and Resources office. They are always welcome to help. I know that our librarians are very committed to making sure that we have the best possible experience for our users. So if you ever come across anything, whether it's the library website, using our resources, part of the building, please feel free to reach out to us so that we can correct that. You know, sometimes we don't know what we don't know, and we're always looking to improve that situation. If you have any questions about the presentation specifically, I've put my information up here. Again, I'm Christine and I'm the STEM librarian, and I'm happy to answer questions, send you some of the resources that I talked about in the presentation, or anything else that you need. So, any questions today? I think we're doing well. I would like to remind you, if you haven't already, Sarah put a link in the chat so that you can register your attendance today. We are doing some prizes this semester. So when you scan in and you say that you were at the presentation, that puts you in a drawing. We're doing a few small prizes each month and a big prize, I think, at the end of the semester. So make sure you sign in so that we know you're there. Thank y'all so much. I'm going to stop the recording now.